Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Wisdom in the Best Books in Films, where we go through a bunch of my favorites and look for bite-sized nuggets that we can learn from and hopefully get better. I'm Jake Bear, the host, and this week I'm going to stick with Jane Austen one more week, and we are going to talk about Pride and Prejudice. This is probably the most well-known of her stuff, although Sense and Sensibility, as I mentioned last week, is my favorite. This one has been done in a movie several times. It has also been done in a miniseries. The miniseries with Colin Firth from 1995, I think, is the best film adaptation of it, in my opinion. Really good job there. And the book is also wonderful and entertaining. We always do very light, short pieces of books on this podcast, but there are other very good podcasts that do deeper dives into some of these things, and one of those is Well Done for This Book. Storytime for Grown-Ups by Faith Moore is a fantastic podcast. If you want to get a really deep dive into Pride and Prejudice, she reads the whole thing. And she does little side notes where she tells you the meaning of different odd words that we might not use anymore, gives you some context. So if you're interested in doing the full book, I highly recommend Storytime for Grown-Ups. Great place to go and learn things that might make you better and might entertain you at the same time. So just a recommendation for this one. This week's episode is called Interpreting with Charity. Many of us can misjudge comments we hear based on a desire to be right, a dislike of the speaker, or even just a lack of waiting for 2 seconds to think about what was said. Instead, we, in our haste, spit out some quip or remark that is unfair at best, but may even be just plain mean. Recently, my wife tried to tell me about how the kids don't have time to go outside and play as much as she did as a kid in the summer, and she wanted them to have more time to do that. Now, what I decided she meant was they need less chores and work to do. So I jumped on the offensive and said, they don't need less work, they need more! I worked in a sugar beet field pulling weeds for 4 or 5 hours per day during the summer when I was that age, and that left me half a day to do whatever I wanted. Do I sound like an ass yet? Now, what my wife was actually trying to articulate, and may have gotten to if I hadn't jumped down her throat, was that our kids were being inefficient with their time. They have been in a habit of dawdling and putting off their work for so long that they don't get their work done until late in the day and thus lose the opportunity to have as much fun as we would like. After making some poor choices, I eventually let my wife speak long enough to figure out what she meant. And we got the problem figured out, but I made the process much worse by my uncharitable interpretation of what she meant. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen has an excellent example of another way this can happen. Elizabeth Bennet decides early in the book, miniseries, or movie that she despises Mr. Darcy because of a comment he makes at a ball that she happens to overhear about her not being pretty enough to tempt him. Now, we can get into the weeds on this, but I personally think this is one of very few mistakes Mr. Darcy makes, but Elizabeth holds that grudge against him for a very long time. At one point in the story, Elizabeth spends a few days at an estate called Neverfield helping to nurse her sister Jane back to health. During this time, she spends evenings with Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bingley, and Mr. Bingley's sisters. One evening in Chapter 11 of the book, or Episode 1 of the Colin Firth miniseries, Mr. Darcy says that he has the fault of not forgiving people once he has put them in his bad graces.
My temper I cannot vouch for. It might be called resentful. My good opinion once lost is lost forever.
So that was in response to Elizabeth asking about his faults so that she could joke about them and tease him. But she says it's hard to joke about that fault because it seems such a bad one. Here's her response.
I believe every disposition has a tendency to some particular evil.
Your defect is a propensity to hate everyone.
Well, yours is willfully to misunderstand them.
Now, I want to point out in the show, Colin Firth does not smile when he says that. But in the book, it specifically says, and yours, he replied with a smile, is willfully to misunderstand them. So he's kind of teasing her back in the book. The show is fantastic. I just wanted to point out that interpretation, and I will be talking about the book here. So Mr. Darcy says she is not just mistaking what he said, but willfully misunderstanding the meaning behind what he said. She is allowing her strong dislike of him to help her assume that he can only mean the worst possible interpretation of what he said. Mr. Darcy responds with a smile, not taking offense at her jab, but that is lucky for her that he was already in the throes of strong twitterpation. Mr. Darcy's response to the comment is one good solution in response to similar treatment. He teases her a little playfully about her misunderstanding of his words. We should try to respond kindly, and we should also try to avoid putting our own feet in our mouths in similar circumstances. On rare occasions, people really are just plain jerks, and we should not stay in abusive situations. But most of the time, people are just not very good about expressing themselves. If we can seek the most charitable interpretation of what people are saying, we will be happier even if they were trying to be mean. So in the case of my wife that I mentioned earlier, I would have been happier, even if she really did want our kids to be lazy, if I had not approached my response with such an aggressive refutation of her words. Now, I happen to know my wife, and she is not someone who would want that, which should have made it a lot easier for me to wait 2 seconds and ask for clarification of what she said. But sometimes we all need to make a fool of ourselves to learn. In those instances, let them push you to be more forgiving of similar issues others have. Look at those times as opportunities to learn to see what others are doing in a more charitable light, and you will live happier and have better relationships for it. Thank you all for listening. I wanted to add a quick note at the end here this week. I've had a couple of people ask me what they can do to help the show. The most important thing that you all can do to help out the show is to share the things that you learn, to text people links to episodes that are really impactful that you think they would like, share something in church or at work with somebody that you think fits with the topic of conversation or the lesson or whatever. In short, just find a natural way to share what we've talked about on the podcast with others and recommend it to them to listen to. In addition to that, I hope that you take these as good recommendations for things to consume, good shows, good movies, good books. I really enjoy all of the ones that I share. I try not to pick ones that are boring, so I recommend you do that. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful Father's Day, and we will talk to you all next week.